Welcome to HD Rare Coins, your ultimate source for rare coins, fascinating history, and the thrill of discovery. From legendary pennies to hidden gems, we explore the world of numismatics one amazing coin at a time. The year was 1941. War clouds loomed heavy over the Atlantic, casting long shadows across Europe and the Pacific. America stood at the edge of a historic decision, not yet at war but feeling the tremors of a world unraveling. Factories rumbled with energy, families listened to radios in hushed tones, and the nation, unknowingly, prepared for the firestorm that was to come. In that climate of uncertainty and steel resolve, something small and copper-born slipped quietly into circulation that it didn't carry the weight of a bullet, nor the voice of a speech. But in its own way, the 1941 1-cent penny would outlast both. Millions of them, in fact. Yet among them, hidden, overlooked, worn by time, there would emerge a few whose rarity, flaws, and untold stories would make them legendary. This coin wasn't born with ceremony. It wasn't a commemorative issue, nor a special edition. It was part of the routine beat of a country that needed copper to move, copper for wires, copper for bullets, copper for life. And still, it gave copper to coins. Each 1941 penny was struck in 95% copper, with the remainder a touch of tin and zinc, as it had been since 1909. Yet, that year, the conditions were different. That year, the pressure was building that in Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, presses roared to life. Over 1 billion pennies were minted that year. But despite the massive number, not all were created equal. A boy named Thomas Reynolds discovered that the hard way. His story begins decades later, in 1978, in a quiet attic in Michigan. While sorting through his grandfather's belongings, he came across a small cigar box labeled "Odd Pennies." Inside were coins his grandfather had pulled from circulation over the years. At the time, it didn't seem like much. But one penny caught Thomas's eye, not for its shine, but for its imperfection. The date, 1941, was off-center. The word "Liberty" looked thicker than usual, like it had been doubled. And Lincoln's profile had the faintest shadow behind it. He took it to a local coin shop, expecting nothing. The man behind the counter paused, studied it with a loupe, and asked if Thomas would be willing to leave it overnight. Reluctantly, he agreed. What followed was a chain reaction. The coin was sent to the Professional Coin Grading Service, PCGS, where it was identified as a double die obverse error, extremely rare for that year. Only a handful had ever been confirmed. The depth of the doubling, the preservation of the coin's surface, and the sharpness of the minting all combined to create something truly remarkable. Within weeks, the story reached the coin collectors' circuit. Offers came in from across the country. And Thomas, the boy who'd climbed into an attic on a lazy Saturday afternoon, suddenly had a coin worth tens of thousands of dollars. But that was just the beginning. The beauty of the 1941 penny lies not just in its metal, but in the era it represents. It's a coin born on the cusp of transformation, when the U.S. was still at peace, but not for long. The penny's reverse bore 2 wheat ears, symbolizing prosperity and hard work, encasing the words, 1 cent, and United States of America. The Latin phrase, e pluribus unum, out of many, one, arched above them, echoing a unity that would soon be tested on battlefields across the globe. Collectors began to look more closely at 1941 pennies. Some were struck on misaligned planchets. Others bore S or D mint marks that were faint or missing entirely. There were those with lamination cracks, caused by impurities in the metal, minor flaws that now added character and value. And then there were the uncirculated ones, hiding in bank rolls, their red luster still intact after decades. One of the most famous examples surfaced in 1996, when a Texas woman named Carla Jensen walked into a coin show in Houston. She carried a velvet pouch with a few dozen old coins, including one that had been tucked into a wedding album since 1942. A penny, unremarkable at first glance, until an expert noticed it bore no mint mark. Under magnification, its surfaces were flawless. The strike was full and sharp, with no signs of handling. It graded MS 67 plus RD, and later sold at auction for $64,000. But it wasn't just collectors who fell in love with the 1941 penny. Historians, too, saw in it a relic of innocence, an artifact minted before Pearl Harbor, before America fully entered the maelstrom of World War II. This tiny coin, passed from hands buying bread, newspapers, or a child's candy, had unknowingly witnessed the shift of an entire civilization. Some coins found their way into war. In letters sent home, soldiers would tape a penny inside, for luck, many wrote. Others used them as markers, or talismans, or simply as something familiar to hold on to. One Marine's diary, now housed in a museum, tells of finding a 1941 penny in his coat pocket during the Battle of Okinawa. "Lincoln looks tired," he wrote. "I think we both are." Time passed, and the coins aged. Their bright red copper turned deep brown, some dark with oxidation, others polished smooth by decades of touch. Many were lost to time. But those that survived carried stories, personal, historical, emotional. By the time coin grading became mainstream in the late 20th century, the hunt was on. Collectors scoured bank rolls, estate sales, and auction houses. Prices surged for clean examples, especially those with strong strikes, double dies, or mint errors. Some fetched hundreds. Others, thousands. And once in a while, one would surface that defied belief. In 2022, an anonymous bidder paid $128,500 for a 1941 penny with a unique planchet flaw, a rare transitional error suspected to be the result of an experimental alloy. The coin bore no obvious visual cue, yet emitted slightly different readings under X-ray fluorescence. Whether this coin was part of a test batch or a freak accident remains unclear, but its authenticity was verified by 3 separate grading agencies, and so, a coin that cost a cent in 1941, one that may have bought a loaf of bread or a glass of soda, now sits in a temperature-controlled vault, insured for more than most homes. But perhaps the most powerful part of the 1941 penny story is this: it's still out there. Not just in vaults and collections, but in jars, drawers, and forgotten boxes. Somewhere, maybe in a shoebox under an old bed or resting at the bottom of a coffee tin, another treasure waits. That's the magic of it. The unknown, because every time someone flips through a handful of pennies, hoping to spot the right date, the right mint mark, or the glint of an uncirculated gleam, they're doing more than just searching for value. They're reaching back in time. They're connecting with a moment, a legacy, and a story bigger than copper, and they're reminded of a simple truth: even the smallest things can hold the greatest worth. Somewhere in upstate New York, an elderly man named Edwin Delaney sat on the edge of his bed, staring at a coin he hadn't looked at in over 60 years. The room was quiet, just the steady tick of an old clock on the wall, the same clock his wife once wound every Sunday morning. She had passed the year before, and now Edwin found himself revisiting the artifacts of their life together: a wooden jewelry box, a photo album with sun-bleached pages, and tucked into a velvet-lined compartment beneath a false drawer, a single wheat penny. He remembered exactly where it came from. He was 13. His father had sent him down to the corner store to buy flour and a half-pound of coffee. The change came back in a paper pouch. That evening, he laid the coins out on the kitchen table, counting them aloud like his father taught him. That's when he noticed one penny looked newer, cleaner, as though it hadn't touched many hands. He kept it. Slipped it into his pocket. Later that night, he pressed it into the soft palm of a girl who lived 3 houses down. "It's not a ring," he told her. "But it's something shiny." Her name was Ruth. She laughed and gave it back. "You keep it," she said. "So you'll remember me when you're rich." They married 10 years later. Now, decades on, Edwin held that same coin. He hadn't thought of its worth in years, only its meaning. But something about the news he'd heard recently, a radio segment about a rare 1941 penny fetching 6 figures, stirred something in him. The details were fuzzy, but he knew there was something about doubling, sharp strikes, mint marks. Words he didn't understand but suddenly felt important. The next morning, with the coin tucked carefully into a small cloth, Edwin boarded a bus to the city. He walked into a coin dealer's shop that looked more like a law office than a store. He handed the coin over, embarrassed by how his hands shook. The dealer examined it with practiced care, his eyes widening just a bit as he adjusted the magnifier. Then he looked up. "Sir," he said gently, "would you mind if I send this out for authentication?" Weeks passed. Edwin heard nothing. Then came the letter, MS 66 plus. Double die obverse. Philadelphia Mint. Extremely rare. Estimated auction value, $82,000 to $94,000. That he didn't say much to anyone. Just took the letter, folded it twice, and slipped it into the same drawer where Ruth's love letters were kept. Some things, he believed, didn't need to be sold to be valuable. That's the thing about the 1941 penny. It doesn't scream for attention. It hides in plain sight. But those who know, who understand what it is and what it represents, they feel it. Like a pulse, across the country, in Nevada, another story was taking shape. Samantha Lopez was only 12 when she stumbled across her treasure. Her grandfather, a quiet, stoic man who rarely smiled but always gave her chocolate when no one was looking, had passed away the previous winter. In his old garage, stuffed behind a metal shelf, she found an old cigar box full of coins. Her mom told her to toss them. It was 1948, and America was breathing again. The war had ended 3 years prior, and though the scars were still healing, there was a new rhythm in the streets, a post-war hum of optimism. Men returned from overseas, women walked a little taller after holding the home front, and children, born during years of uncertainty, now played under the peaceful sky of a re-emerging nation. And that hopeful silence, a copper coin was born. It didn't make headlines. It didn't arrive with fanfare. The 1948 Lincoln Wheat Penny entered circulation like any other cent had for decades, small, simple, reddish-brown. Just another round piece of change for soda bottles, bus rides, and Saturday matinees. But this penny, like the time it came from, carried more than metal. It carried the unspoken hope of a world rediscovering normal. The Philadelphia Mint, dies were loaded into heavy machines that hissed and roared like living beasts. Blank copper planchets were fed into the chambers and slammed with the image of Abraham Lincoln on one side and 2 wheat ears on the other, a design already familiar to every American pocket. But something was different about the 1948 issue. Not in its appearance, but in what it would become. Over 317 million pennies were struck that year. Most would live quiet, uneventful lives. They would pass through vending machines, drop into church collection plates, disappear into the lining of jackets, and fall between floorboards. They were tools, utilitarian, forgotten, but as always, there were exceptions. Some 1948 pennies were born flawed, struck by misaligned dies, imprinted on foreign planchets, doubled by accident. Some bore ghosts of old coin designs, remnants left behind from dies that hadn't been cleaned properly. And among them, a few would travel decades before their secrets were even noticed. In a small town in Illinois, a coin collector named Josephine Waters discovered one such secret in 1992. She was sorting through her late father's collection, an old man who had worked in a steel factory, but who quietly collected wheat pennies on the side. Most of the coins were common. But there, stuck between 2 rusted nickels, was a 1948 penny with something odd. Its rim was clipped, like someone had taken a bite from it. The 8 in the date was thicker, fatter, as though it had been double-stamped. She took it to a regional coin show on a whim. What she left with was a storm of interest. That penny, later confirmed to be a rare double die obverse from the Philadelphia Mint, sold at a private auction for $27,000. But the real value wasn't just in the number, it was in what it represented. Suddenly, people began to look closer. Collectors who had overlooked the 1948 cent for years now revisited their old coin jars. Every faint imperfection became a potential fortune, and then there was the man from Arizona, his name was never made public, who had inherited a jar of coins from his grandfather. A mason by trade, his grandfather had always said, "Keep the pennies. They're luckier than they look." Among the jar's contents was a pristine, full red, uncirculated 1948 D penny. When it was submitted to PCGS, it received an MS68RD designation, an almost impossibly high grade for a coin that AGE.IN 2018, that penny sold for $87,000. The room fell silent when the hammer dropped. Some people clapped. Others just nodded, but what makes the 1948 penny truly magical is how ordinary it pretends to be. Its design remained unchanged, Lincoln's calm, steady profile, unchanged since Victor David Brenner sculpted it in 1909. The wheat reverse, a final flourish of agriculture and symmetry, bookending the bold words, 1 cent, and United States of America. It was a coin of the people. Humble. Consistent, and that humility is part of its deception, because not all 1948 pennies are equal. Those minted in Philadelphia bore no mint mark, while those from Denver and San Francisco carried the familiar D and S. Yet even among those, there were mysteries, variations in die polish, minor doubling, clipped planchets, off-center strikes, and ghost images from prior design overlays. A handful were even struck on leftover planchets meant for foreign countries, pennies that weighed differently, rang differently, and stood out under the right light. That in one corner of Texas, a teenage girl named Mia stumbled upon her grandfather's coin collection hidden beneath the floorboards of a crumbling farmhouse. She posted photos online, just curious if any were special. One image caught the attention of a professional grader watching from Florida. A 1948 S penny, in what appeared to be mirror finish, proof-like, yet not from any official proof run. They had found something else, a specimen strike, one of only a handful believed to have been made by accident, or perhaps for internal testing. That it sold for $72,000. But more than that, it made her fall in love with coins. She started a YouTube channel. Taught other kids how to spot rare dates. Became a voice in a world many her age ignored, and that's the heart of it. The 1948 penny isn't just a piece of metal. It's a vessel of memory. Of luck. Of love. Of war and peace, laughter and silence. It has passed through uncountable lives, slipped between generations, waited patiently in jars and drawers, saying nothing, until someone truly looked. Today, as interest in wheat pennies continues to grow, the 1948 issue has become a favorite of both beginners and experts. Beginners love it for its accessibility. Experts chase its anomalies. And somewhere, maybe even in your own pocket change, one might be waiting to surprise you. To tell you a story. To remind you that history doesn't always live in museums or textbooks. Sometimes, it hides in copper. In the dusty corner of a quiet Wisconsin library, an archivist named Harold Turner found himself face to face with a mystery that would send waves through the coin collecting world. He wasn't looking for coins. He was scanning historical ledgers, documenting the financial records of local families from the 1940s for a museum digitization project. Somewhere between brittle bank receipts and handwritten grocery logs, a small brown envelope fell from between the pages of a ledger. Inside were 4 coins wrapped in wax paper, each carefully labeled. One caught his eye immediately: perfect color. No wear. But it wasn't the surface that struck him, it was the sound. When Harold dropped the coin on the wooden table, it didn't produce the dull thud of typical copper. It rang, lightly, sharply. Like silver. His curiosity piqued. He brought the coin to a local university's metallurgy lab. What they discovered stunned even the experts: the coin had been struck on a foreign silver zinc alloy planchet. Not copper. Not bronze. It was an accident of international scale, likely a planchet intended for a coin from South America that had slipped into the U.S. Mint's production line by mistake. It had never been recorded, never been expected to exist, and yet, there it was. Bright. Impossibly preserved. That coin, after verification and documentation by NGC, was quietly sold in Geneva to a private collector who specialized in world minting anomalies. The price was never disclosed, but rumors among insiders placed the sale near $145,000. From a forgotten library to a Swiss vault, how many more stories like that remain untold? In California, a World War II veteran named Elmer Green kept a 1948 penny in his dresser drawer for over 70 years. To most, it looked ordinary. But Elmer knew better. It wasn't just any penny, it was the one he'd received as change the day he was discharged from the military. He remembered standing outside the station, holding a nickel and 4 pennies, feeling both lost and hopeful. He kept that penny in his palm for hours before deciding to never spend it, when his grandson, a numismatics enthusiast, convinced him to grade the coin in 2021. They discovered it was far more valuable than sentiment. It graded at MS 67 RD, near perfection, and was one of fewer than a dozen known in that state. At auction, it pulled in over $93,000, but Elmer never saw the money as the point. "I spent 3 years at war," he said at the time. "That penny bought me a second chance at life." But the 1948 penny didn't just stay within American borders. It traveled the world. In the quiet streets of Seoul, a man named Jun-ho Lee, a former Korean War orphan adopted into the U.S. by a Michigan family in 1950, recalled how his American foster father used a single coin to teach him English. It was a 1948 wheat penny. Every night, he'd hold the coin in one hand and a flashcard in the other. He learned 1 cent, liberty, and "In God We Trust" long before he learned the Pledge of Allegiance. That coin became his totem. Years later, when Jun-ho became an economist and eventually returned to Korea, he still carried it with him. It had been his bridge to language, to family, to hope. One day, during a televised interview, he showed the coin to the camera and told his story. Within days, offers flooded in from collectors wanting to buy the coin, not just for its perfect red tone and potential MS 66 plus grade, but for the meaning etched into its copper skin. That he declined them all. Some coins, he believed, are priceless, and yet, the market continued to rise. Between 2020 and 2025, the average value of high-grade 1948 pennies climbed steadily. Collectors who once bypassed them as common wheat cents now scrutinized their details. The demand for full red examples from Denver and San Francisco soared. Even-toned, brown-colored pieces with rare die cracks or repunching errors began drawing attention. A particularly dramatic example came to light in Oregon, where a woman named Bethany Connors inherited a large hoard of her father's estate, mostly old tools, some silver, and a few boxes of coins. She nearly gave the whole lot away until a local coin shop owner spotted something strange on a 1948 penny.